I remember the house being too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes your skin prickle. The hallway light was still on, casting a dull yellow stripe across the floor. And my shoes sounded too loud as I stepped inside. Something in my chest tightened before my mind could catch up, like my body already knew what I was about to lose. If you're listening to this and you've ever trusted someone completely, go ahead and subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this don't start with warning signs. They start with belief. The air smelled wrong, unfamiliar, and my heart began to race in a way that had nothing to do with love anymore. I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring at the stairs as if they were watching me back. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was the last peaceful moment of my marriage. That was the night everything started to unravel. This is the night my marriage ended. Even though I was still wearing my wedding ring and still believed we were building something together. It was our anniversary, and I had come home early, carrying the quiet excitement of a surprise I thought would matter. I remember unlocking the front door and stepping inside, already rehearsing the smile I would give when he saw me. Instead, the house felt wrong. Not messy, not loud, just hollow. The lights were low, casting long shadows across the floor, and every sound I made echoed back at me like the space no longer recognized me. I told myself it was nothing. A long day, a tired mind. Love makes you generous with explanations. I had always believed commitment was a series of small choices. Showing up early, coming home tired but willing, trusting that effort counted. Even when life pulled you in opposite directions. Standing there, I clung to that belief the way you cling to a railing when the ground feels unsteady. But my body noticed what my heart refused to. The air felt tight. The silence felt watched. I felt an unfamiliar pressure in my chest. The kind that doesn't ask permission. Then I saw it. Something small. Something ordinary. Something that didn't belong to me. And in that moment, before I understood why, I knew I was no longer safe. I moved deeper into the house, telling myself to slow down, to stop letting my imagination run ahead of me. That was when I noticed the first thing that didn't fit. A pair of shoes near the stairs. Not my style. Not my size. I stared at them longer than I should have, as if they might explain themselves if I waited. Then there was a scarf draped over the back of the couch. Soft, careless, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I remember adjusting it, straightening it, doing something small and domestic because it felt easier than asking the question forming in my chest. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. A visitor. A misunderstanding. Something temporary. Trust has a way of protecting you from truths you are not ready to hold. I had spent years believing love meant giving the benefit of the doubt, even when your instincts whispered otherwise. So I corrected myself. I scolded my thoughts. I reminded myself that suspicion could destroy good things faster than truth ever could. But my body didn't listen. My shoulders were tense. My breath was shallow. Every step felt deliberate, careful, like I was walking through a space that might break if I moved too quickly. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to laugh at myself for overthinking. Then I heard it, a sound from upstairs. Soft, unmistakable, and completely wrong. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs like my body had been unplugged from the rest of me. Every sound sharpened. The hum of the lights. The quiet air moving through the house. Even my own heartbeat felt too loud. The staircase rose in front of me like a boundary I couldn't unsee. A thin line between what I hoped was true and what already was. That was when I heard his voice. Calm. Unconcerned. Certain. Not the voice of someone afraid of being caught, but of someone who believed the night was under control. He sounded sure I wasn't coming back, sure enough to relax. And in that certainty, something inside me finally gave way. There is a strange gap between understanding the truth and accepting it. I stood there, suspended in it, knowing exactly what was happening while still wishing my mind would offer me a different ending. Fear moved through me before anger ever could. My hands were cold. My legs felt unsteady. This wasn't about jealousy. It was about recognition. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the clarity that followed. The realization that the man I had built a life around existed only in my faith, not in reality. I had trusted a version of him that didn't stand up when tested. For a moment, I considered backing away, preserving the last fragile pieces of denial. But something steadied me, a quiet resolve I didn't recognize yet. I placed my foot on the first step, then the next, and began to climb, knowing there was no going back. I pushed the door open, expecting pain, but not this, not her. Standing there, in my bedroom, was the person I had once called family. The friend who had known me before the marriage, before the house, before any of this. The one who had sat beside me through breakups and celebrations, who had promised loyalty without ever being asked. My mind reached backward on instinct, flipping through memories like evidence that this couldn't be real. Late nights talking on the phone. Inside, jokes no one else understood. Her standing beside me on my wedding day, smiling like she was proud of me. I had trusted her without question. I had never thought to protect myself from her. What unsettled me most was not what she was doing, but how she looked doing it. Calm, composed, almost relieved. There was no panic in her posture, no shame in her eyes. She carried herself like someone who had already made peace with the outcome, like someone who believed she belonged there more than I did. In that moment, the betrayal shifted shape. This wasn't about infidelity. It wasn't even about love. It was about humiliation, about realizing that two people I trusted had made choices together, quietly, while I defended them in my own mind. I felt something inside me fracture, not explode, not burn, but crack under the weight of understanding. My chest tightened, my thoughts blurred. I wasn't jealous. I was exposed, reduced to an obstacle in my own life. The room felt smaller with every breath. The balance I had forced myself to keep began to slip. And I knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was about to lose control. Everything blurred after that. My thoughts collided. My chest felt too tight, and my body reacted before I could slow it down. I remember the sharp surge of humiliation finally breaking through the numbness, my hand moving without permission, driven by something raw and instinctive. It wasn't rage. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim dignity in a room where I had just lost all of it. The sound that followed felt louder than it should have, like the walls themselves had flinched. For half a second, the world froze, and then everything changed. I watched his face shift in real time. The panic vanished. The excuses disappeared. What replaced them was something colder and far more frightening. His eyes hardened. And in that moment, I understood I was no longer dealing with a man trying to hide a mistake. I was standing in front of someone who felt challenged, exposed, and furious. The first blow didn't register as pain. It registered as disbelief. A violent jolt that knocked the air out of my lungs and folded me inward. I remember the shock more than anything else. The confusion of realizing that the person who had once held me when I cried was now the one hurting me. My body struggled to catch up with what my mind refused to accept. That was when the fear set in. Clear, undeniable. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a loss of control. This was a choice. I felt his grip tighten, guiding me, forcing me forward while my legs felt unsteady beneath me. The room spun, my thoughts fractured. I stopped thinking about what I would say or do next and focused only on staying upright, on breathing, on surviving the next few seconds. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet understanding settled in. This was no longer about betrayal. This was about getting out alive. I barely understood where he was taking me until the stairs came into view. My feet dragged against the floor. My balance gone. My thoughts scrambling to catch up with what my body already knew. Fear hollowed me out. Every step closer felt unreal. Like I was watching my life from a distance I could not close. What hurt most in that moment was not the force. It was the contempt. The way I was handled like an inconvenience, like something broken and disposable. That humiliation cut deeper than anything physical, stripping away whatever illusion of love I still clung to. I realized I was no longer a person to him. I was an obstacle. The staircase loomed like a line I could not uncross. Above it was who I had been only minutes before. Below it was something unknown and terrifying. I remember thinking, with a strange calm, that once I crossed this point, nothing in my life would ever feel safe again. Then there was a sudden release. A weightless second where my body forgot how gravity worked. The world fractured into sharp flashes of light, sound, and pain. I felt myself tumbling, not falling so much as being scattered. Each step hitting a different part of me. Each impact stealing more air from my lungs. When everything stopped, I couldn't move. Pain pulsed through my back and legs in dull, blinding waves. I waited for concern, for hesitation, for anything resembling regret. What I sensed instead was irritation, impatience, as if my broken body was an inconvenience slowing him down. I lay there stunned, breath shallow, heart racing, staring at the ceiling I could no longer reach. In that stillness, the truth settled fully. This was not a mistake. This was not temporary. I was trapped, injured, and completely alone. And the life I had known was already gone. I don't remember how I got to the basement. Only the dragging sensation and the way my body refused to cooperate. Each step downward felt colder, heavier, as if the house itself was closing around me. My back screamed when I was lowered onto the concrete. And then his hands were gone. The light was dim, barely enough to outline the walls. Cold crept through my clothes and settled into my bones. Pain pulsed in slow waves, making it hard to breathe deeply. I tried to move and learned quickly what I could not do. The effort left me shaking, dizzy, smaller than I had ever felt. Then I heard the door. The sound was solid and final. A thick click that erased the rest of the house. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. It was worse than the noise had been. In that quiet, a single thought took shape. I had been discarded. I lay there staring into the dark, realizing how easily a person can be reduced to an inconvenience, not worth explaining, not worth checking on, just moved out of sight. The humiliation settled deeper than the pain, hollowing me out. Minutes stretched without shape. I listened for footsteps or voices. Nothing came. The absence above me felt intentional. That was when something shifted inside me. This was no longer about betrayal or answers. This was about whether I would make it through the night. I went still, conserving strength, counting breaths, waiting in the cold. I did not know if help would come. I could not give up. I don't know how long I lay there before I noticed the phone. It was still in my pocket, pressed warm against my leg, like it had been waiting. My hands shook as I pulled it out, half expecting the screen to be dead. When it lit up, dim but alive, something in my chest cracked open. Holding it hurt. Everything hurt. But the heavier weight was the choice in front of me. I had built my life around not making this call. Years of silence, avoidance, convincing myself I didn't need him. Pride had carried me that far, even when it cost me comfort and connection. In that basement, pride finally ran out. I remember staring at his name, feeling the distance of all those years collapse into one fragile moment. I wasn't calling to explain or to heal old wounds. I was calling because I was scared, because I was alone, because survival had stripped everything else away. My finger hovered, then pressed down. The act itself felt like surrender, like admitting I could not do this by myself. I focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on not apologizing for needing help. When I was acknowledged on the other end, something shifted immediately. Not joy, not resolution, relief. The kind that loosens your shoulders and steadies your thoughts. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't abandoned in that silence. As the call ended, I held the phone to my chest and waited. Help was coming. For the first time that night, I was not completely alone. I drifted in and out of awareness, time losing its shape. Sounds came first. Footsteps that didn't rush. Voices that stayed level. Nothing sharp. Nothing frantic. It was unfamiliar in the best possible way. When the basement door opened, light spilled down the steps. Steady and controlled. It didn't feel like a rescue scene. It felt like a procedure. I watched figures move with purpose. Not urgency. As if everything dangerous had already been handled. Hands reached toward me, careful and practiced. Assessing rather than reacting. I remember noticing how calm they were, how that calm wrapped around the room and pushed the chaos back where it belonged. I didn't need reassurance. Their presence was enough. Somewhere above. The house felt smaller, contained, no longer able to touch me. I caught a brief glimpse of him as I was lifted. He looked reduced, held in place, stripped of the power that had filled the rooms earlier. The woman who had once felt so threatening seemed distant now, almost unreal, like something already fading. I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty in a steady way, numb, but grounded, safe without needing to celebrate it. As they carried me out, the air changed. The house fell behind me, quiet and closed. I focused on the movement forward, the certainty that I was leaving and not coming back. Whatever waited next, I was no longer alone. I woke to white light and the steady hum of machines. Pain announced itself in layers, sharp in my ribs, dull along my spine. But it felt distant, like information rather than threat. The room smelled clean and quiet, wrapped in soft beeps and careful footsteps that never hurried. For the first time since that night, my mind was still. No looping fear, no reaching for exits, just a clear awareness that I was here. Breathing, contained. The chaos had burned itself out. I noticed my father sitting nearby, his jacket folded across his lap, his posture patient and unmoving. He did not crowd me or search my face for explanations. He was simply present. That steadiness anchored the room more than any monitor. I expected anger to rush in once I was safe. It didn't. What filled the space instead was clarity. The kind that comes after your body has done everything it can to keep you alive and finally lets go. I could think again. Slowly. Precisely. I understood then that I didn't want noise or revenge or immediate answers. I wanted control. I wanted decisions made without shaking hands or racing thoughts. Lying there, listening to the hospital breathe around me, I felt the pause settle in. Not an ending. Not yet. Just the calm before choosing what came next. I decided to return to the house while my body was still healing. Leaving would have been easier, cleaner, expected. But I understood something then. People who harm relax when they believe the story is over, when they believe they have been forgiven or feared enough to be silent. I chose silence on purpose, not because I was confused, but because quiet gives you room to see clearly. I let the image of forgiveness settle in front of him, knowing how quickly tension drains when someone thinks they have won. Inside, I set rules for myself. I would not argue. I would not explain. I would never raise my voice again. Emotion had already taken enough from me. Truth would do the rest without noise. I prepared carefully. Not dramatically. I made sure I was not alone. Even when I appeared to be. There were people who knew where I was, who checked in, who would notice if anything shifted. Protection does not have to be loud to be real. Returning was not about bravery. It was about control, about patience, about letting time loosen what force never could. When I pictured walking back through that door, I felt steady, ready. I wasn't going back to survive. I was going back to observe, to record, and to let the truth collect itself. I went back into the rhythm of daily life as if nothing had shifted. And that was what unsettled him the most. He watched me closely, waiting for anger, tears, accusations. When none came, his nerves filled the silence. People who expect chaos don't know what to do with calm. I learned quickly how restraint is mistaken for weakness. My quiet made him careless. He stopped guarding his habits, stopped hiding his patterns. Familiar routines reopened doors that had always been there. Passwords stayed the same. Devices were left unattended. Stories didn't quite line up the way they used to. I didn't rush. I observed. I noticed timestamps, gaps, repetitions. I let things repeat until they told the truth on their own. Messages connected to schedules. Excuses mirrored past lies. What once felt confusing became predictable, almost dull in its consistency. Each piece landed softly, without drama. Screenshots saved and labeled. Records backed up. Patterns mapped in my head before they ever lived on paper. I wasn't hunting. I was confirming. Truth has a way of assembling itself when you stop interrupting it with emotion. What surprised me most was how easy it became. Being underestimated gave me time. Time to watch. Time to verify. Time to let certainty replace suspicion. The tension didn't come from fear anymore. It came from anticipation. From knowing exactly how much weight the truth was gathering. By the time I finished, there was nothing left to chase. Everything I needed already existed, quiet and complete. I held it carefully, knowing that once released, it would move on its own, and there would be no way to call it back. The room was formal, structured, confident in its assumptions. People settled into their seats believing they already knew how the story would go. I stood when I wasn't expected to, and that alone shifted the air. I felt steady, almost distant, as if I were observing the moment from somewhere above it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out what existed. Dates aligned. Records matched. Timelines corrected themselves. Each piece fit cleanly into the next. And the order mattered more than emotion ever could. I watched faces change as comprehension moved through the room in waves. Quiet, at first, then unavoidable. There was a moment when people stopped looking at me and started looking at him. Not with outrage, but with recalibration. Respect draining. Authority thinning. Control slipping without a single word needing to be thrown. What had once been confidence now looked fragile, poorly supported by facts that refused to bend. I noticed how still I felt. No shaking. No rush. Just clarity. I had carried this truth alone long enough for it to lose its sharp edges. What remained was weight. And weight does its damage slowly and completely. As the final pieces landed, the room felt different. Not loud. Not explosive. Just altered. Reputations don't collapse in noise. They unravel in silence. When certainty dissolves and no one steps in to save it, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. The truth had moved out of my hands and into the open. Where it belonged, I stepped back, knowing nothing could be rearranged now. What had been hidden was visible. What had been protected was exposed. And without anger, without spectacle, the truth had done exactly what it was meant to do. After everything became public, my father brought me what he had carried quietly for years. Not stories. Records. Folders worn thin from being opened and closed without permission to speak. He set them down the same way he had always handled the past. Carefully. As if noise itself could cause damage. Inside were fragments of my mother's life that never made it into memory. Medical notes that stopped abruptly. Financial trails that vanished without explanation. Correspondence that hinted at pressure. At compliance extracted rather than given. None of it screamed. That was the most unsettling part. It was orderly. Sanitized. Designed to look final. As I read, grief arrived late, but heavy. I realized how much of her absence I had accepted without question. How easily silence becomes normal when everyone around you treats it that way. What I had been told as inevitability now looked like erasure. The connections formed slowly. The same names appearing across decades. The same systems closing ranks. What happened to my mother was not an isolated tragedy. It was a rehearsal. A proof that truth could be managed, buried, and rebranded if the right people agreed to look away. I understood then why my marriage had followed familiar lines. Why power behaved predictably. Why exposure caused panic. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about inheritance. About patterns passed down quietly because no one stopped them. My anger shifted shape. It became steadier. Less personal. I wasn't just standing in the aftermath of my own story anymore. I was holding part of hers. That realization changed everything. My marriage did not begin this conflict. It only revealed it. And now that I could see where the line truly started, I knew exactly where it needed to end. After the truth entered the open, things moved without me pushing them. Reviews were initiated. Positions were suspended. Oversight appeared where silence had lived comfortably for years. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Systems respond when they are forced to see clearly. I felt no rush of pleasure watching consequences unfold. That surprised me. What I felt instead was distance. His unraveling no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the structures that had protected him, to the records that contradicted him, to the witnesses who no longer had to whisper. I understood then how different justice feels from revenge. Revenge wants pain mirrored back. Justice wants harm to stop. One is fueled by emotion. The other is built to last. I never wanted him to suffer the way I had. I wanted him unable to do it again. I wanted doors closed behind him that had never closed for people like him before. I wanted systems corrected so silence would no longer be rewarded as cooperation. There is a strange peace in reclaiming power without cruelty. It doesn't spike or burn. It settles. It clarifies. I didn't need to monitor his downfall or wait for apologies that would never be honest. My work was already done. What mattered was protection. Mine and others. What mattered was accountability that didn't rely on my anger to sustain it. The truth had carried itself forward, and I stepped out of its way. I chose not to let this story end with retaliation. I chose an ending that made repetition harder, that forced light into places designed to resist it. That choice felt solid, complete. When the noise faded and the processes continued without me, I knew the conflict outside me was resolved. What remained was quieter work, personal work, and for the first time in a long while, I could turn toward it without looking back. When everything finally settled, I expected some dramatic sense of victory. Instead, what came was quiet, ordinary, peaceful in a way that didn't announce itself. Healing, I learned, doesn't arrive with fireworks. It shows up as steadiness, as the absence of fear, as the ability to breathe without bracing for impact. Strength didn't mean enduring more than I should have. It meant recognizing when something was breaking me and choosing to protect myself without apology. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing harm or offering access again. It was about releasing the belief that my worth depended on how much pain I could tolerate. What this experience taught me is simple, but hard-earned. Boundaries are not cruelty. Silence can be power. And your voice matters even when it shakes. Even when it comes late. Even when you're tired. Especially then. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself in my story, I want you to know this. You are not weak for staying. And you are not broken for leaving. Survival looks different on everyone. What matters is choosing yourself when the moment finally comes. Thank you for sitting with me through this story, for listening without judgment, for holding space for something that wasn't easy to tell. Being heard changes something inside a person, and I don't take that lightly. If this resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. Have you ever had to redefine strength or set a boundary that changed everything I read, every message? And if this story helped you feel less alone, consider liking and sharing it so it can reach someone else who might need it tonight.